Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unnext News Radio podcast, your news source for all things unexplained. And now, here's your host for the Unnext News podcast, Margie Kay.
Good evening, and welcome to Unnext News Radio on the KUNXDB Unnext Network, brought to you from a secret undisclosed location disguised as an office on a noisy street in Kansas City, Missouri, where thankfully a lot of strange phenomena occurs and keeps me very busy with investigations. In fact, my assistant and I both saw what we believe was a UFO tracking an F-16 fighter jet today at 12:26 p.m., so now I get to investigate my own sighting. More about that later. My very special guest tonight is Mr. James Fox. James began his journalism career early in life as an assistant to his father, writer Charles Fox, a quadriplegic with multiple sclerosis. Together, they traveled on many magazine assignments, interviewing such notables as Stephen Hawking and race car legend Dan Gurney for the likes of Rolling Stone, Car and Driver, and Sports Illustrated. James finished and sold his first documentary to Discovery by the time he was 28. He has since completed and distributed TV projects for Sci-Fi, TLC, National Geographic, and History Channel. His films include Out of the Blue, I Know What I Saw, The Phenomenon, and his latest release, Moment of Contact, an exploration of extraterrestrial encounters. This one centered on a series of events in 1996 when citizens of Varginha, Brazil, reported seeing one or more strange creatures and a UFO crash. And here now is the trailer for the movie.
In 1996, the people of Varginha, Brazil, witnessed a UFO event that would change their lives forever.
Só que ele planava, ia perdendo lentamente a altitude e ia caminhando.
Followed another Roswell, if you will. It is a crashed vehicle that had beings on board.
Mas que eles não poderiam admitir a verdade. A população ia entrar em colapso.
Nada temos a esconder.
Finally, the facts will be revealed.
The Varginha case is considered the most well-kept secret in the military circles of Brazil.
My objective here is to put some clarity on what took place in Varginha, Brazil, January 1996.
Dois seres extraterrestres foram capturados, depois, posteriormente, foram levados para o hospital.
The witnesses are some of the most compelling testimony I've ever heard.
Meu nome é Carlos de Souza.
Meu nome é Cátia Xavier.
Meu nome é Liliane Silva.
Meu nome é Valquíria Silva.
Em 1996, eu vi uma criatura estranha ali.
Action! A lot of people in this town have a little piece of the puzzle.
Naquele local, eu vi o rastro da criatura, o pé.
Foi onde ele falou que eu vi era uma coisa sobrenatural.
This year,
Mark Elixerez, he had captured this creature with his bare hands.
Você confirma que o seu irmão estava de serviço naquele dia 20?
Confirmo.
After he captured the creature, he developed this infection that wouldn't go away.
Foi pro CTI de manhã, 7 horas da manhã, 15 para o meio-dia, ele veio a óbito.
this can no longer be covered up.
They might shoot us because we're on the property.
This can't be denied.
Bateram na porta e aí falaram pra mim.
Ficar quieto. Se qualquer que ia sofrer uma punição muito severa.
This was proof.
We pull this off. It'll be the most compelling testimony revealed.
Of contact.
Aqui, ó. Foi aqui.
This is a level of confirmation that only a handful of people on this planet have.
Welcome to the program, James Fox.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Margie, sorry.
Thank you so much. I know you're a very busy man, and I know you just had the premiere in New York, and I know this because my friend Lee Spiegel showed me a couple of photos of you and he together, and here
we're going to have to analyze those photographs. I don't know. It still seems a little sketchy, a little blurry. I don't know.
I know. I think I see Leslie Keane there, too.
Second photograph. It looks a little out of focus. Not sure.
Yeah. How did the premiere go?
Oh, it was beautiful. It was sold out. It was a slightly smaller venue than we had in Los Angeles, but a lot of notables showed up. Leslie Keane moderated the event. Which was lovely. It was a great celebration, something that we did not have the opportunity to do with the phenomenon because of the pandemic. So I think it made it all more special.
Absolutely. And it's too bad that you didn't get to do a premiere with the phenomenon, because that movie is phenomenal. I watched it right after it came out, and what does it take to put a film together? How long does it take from start to finish?
Well, the phenomenon nearly killed me. It's really funny. At the East Coast premiere for Moment of Contact, we had a Q&A session that Leslie Keane moderated. And people were handed the microphone in the audience. They were asking questions. And out of the blue, this little boy grabs the microphone and he introduces himself. My name is Ollie Fox, my son, and I have a question for you. I was like, wow. I had no idea that my son was going to get up on stage and ask a question. And he said, what was the most difficult film for you to produce? And it really caught me off guard. And I said, The Phenomenon. When I finished that film after 8 really tough years, don't get me, it's not like I didn't have some fun producing it, but it had a level of challenge that I wasn't at times sure I could overcome. And the last, we had a slated release for theatrical, then the pandemic hit, we pivoted to Netflix, we were going to sign a deal with them, and then that fell through because my distributor accidentally signed with a non-exclusive deal with Discovery, and the whole thing was blowing up. We had lawyers battling each other. It was I was in a ball crying for 3 days. I couldn't eat. I'd reached the end of my rope. And I remember thinking, like, boy, if this is what it takes to be remotely successful in this industry, I don't know. I don't know if I'm cut out. But I'm
sure you have moments like that.
Oh my gosh. And then Moment of Contact, really, I mean, look, it's the result of 12 years of investigation on my part. And it wasn't like every single week I was investigating the case, but I went back and forth to Brazil for 12 years. And then, of course, my co-producer, Marco Leal, Brazilian researcher, he'd been boots on the ground in Varginha for 18 years. So it was the result of a tremendous amount of investigation, knocking on doors, persuading witnesses to come forward. It was a monumental effort.
I can imagine. When you were younger, by the time you were 28, you had sold your first documentary to Discovery. Now, in between the time you were working with your father and you made that first film, what gave you the idea, or what prompted you to start doing documentary films?
Well, I was interested in video production. My father was a mainstream journalist, and he was a quadriplegic for most of my adult life. And so I would travel with him on, different assignments that he had with Car and Driver, Auto Week magazine, Automobile magazine, Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone. And we would go around the world and interview, from Stephen Hawking to race car driver legend Dan Gurney. And but he would write the articles, and it was amazing for me to experience firsthand how much it took just to write an article. There's photographic, stuff introduced, but in terms of there's no videotape. It was a lot of putting words together, and it was a huge effort. And I remember thinking, God, I don't know if I could do that. But then the advent of the video camera and the instant playback, I thought, well, this is a great medium for documenting events and things of that nature. And so I thought, well, I'm really interested in pursuing this because I don't think I have what it takes to write articles, but perhaps I could produce shorts and films and documentaries. So I was interested in that before I got into making UFO documentaries. I had this idea in the mid 90s of producing this like seminal documentary or like feature-length documentary on the topic that could, you know, transcend the UFO community and penetrate a much broader audience. And every time I finished a film, and it roughly took, 4 to 6 years, and I did many of them, I got to the end of it and I was never quite satisfied. I just felt like I didn't quite hit it on the nail of the head. But how many films do you have in you in a lifetime? And when I finished I Know What I Saw, that was my third film on the topic of UFOs. I thought, well, if this one doesn't do it, I don't know if I have it in me to do another one. And we got very close to selling it to a huge distribution company, Lionsgate. And at the last minute, they took a pass, and we ended up selling it to A&E, which ultimately ended up on the History Channel. And I was really disappointed, and I was depressed and kind of down and out, and I was signing the contracts, and the deal was made. I remember my dad was like, well, what's going on, son? Like, why the long face? I said, I don't know, Dad. I didn't quite meet the mark. I had this concept of something and it didn't quite materialize. And he's like, well, yes, but look at what you did do. You created a very compelling documentary on this event that I did at the National Press Club in 2007 with Leslie Kean. And now it's being featured as a 2-hour special on the History Channel. But in the back of my mind, I just didn't feel satisfied. So a couple of years later, I launched the concept of the phenomenon. And after 8 pretty grueling years, I remember watching that film and thinking, okay, I think I've done it. I think this is the film that I initially set out to produce back in the mid 90s.
I can't imagine the work that goes into it, the time involved, the sleepless nights. I'm sure you're dreaming about it and thinking about it all the time, because I know that's what I do when I'm writing a book.
Totally. That's one thing
you're just into it.
That's what I say to people. It's like, it's 8 years, okay? It's not like a job that you have. You go in the morning, you punch the clock,
right?
You do your 8 hours or 10 hours, and then you go home, right? This is like a monkey on your back for 8 straight years. It's constantly there. You think about it all day long. You dream about it all night long. You wake up in the morning stressing about it. It doesn't go away until it's done. And I can't overstate the impact that has on somebody. It really wears you down.
I hope that you're planning on, and that every time you make a film, you take a nice long vacation.
Yeah, that doesn't really happen.
How did I know that was going to be the answer?
I feel like in this industry, you have to strike while the iron's hot. I mean, you only have the limelight for a very small period, and I feel like I have to take advantage of that. And I'm not getting any younger either, so I want to crank out as much good content as I possibly can, and I'd like to keep bringing, good films, good products to the marketplace, because I feel like it's what's needed.
So before we get to the movie,
yes,
I've got to ask you this question. People don't get interested in the UFO subject for no reason at all. So what is your reason?
This is not something I generally talk about, and I don't know if it's anything to do with what drives me, but I had a sighting when I was 20 with a girlfriend of mine, this woman, Lisa Reinhardt, and it wasn't a super spectacular encounter, but one aspect of it really stuck, and that is we both felt at this object that we saw out our bedroom window that was hovering just above the treetops. And it was like an orb, like a white yellow orb. And it was almost pulsating and floating silently in the night sky. We both were like, what is that thing? And we both kind of shrugged our shoulders like, I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, I get the feeling it knows we're looking at it. And we both felt that. And that was one of the aspects of this encounter that was really shocking. Now, whether or not there was any influence or impact internally that I didn't know about or I was unaware of that ultimately propelled me to investigate this phenomenon more in depth, I don't know. But that certainly could be one influence, possibly. The other thing is, I set out to kind of learn about this phenomenon, and I honestly figured that I would make a documentary. I would learn that there are these unknown objects in our airspace, possibly attributed to interplanetary visitation periodic, and for whatever reasons, the governments are covering it up. But here I am 30 years later, probably just as baffled today as I was when I started, which I wish I had more definitive answers, but I just don't.
Talk to any UFO investigator and they will tell you the same thing. 30 or 40 years of investigations, and they're just as frustrated as when they started. So, yeah, it's the big question. That's the big question. What is it? And in this case, so let's get to the movie.
Yes.
Moment of Contact. There were several witnesses who saw craft and who saw alien creatures. The military was involved in Brazil. The U.S. military was involved. This wasn't a small case. So could you just give us a brief synopsis of the case?
Well, we have a subtitle in the film, Moment of Contact, the Roswell of Brazil. And the one advantage of this case is that it happened in 1996. So the vast majority of witnesses are still alive. Mm-hmm. You have witnesses in the town of Varginha, which is about 5 to 6 hours to the north of Sao Paulo, Brazil, in the state of Minas Gerais. And you have witnesses that described this unknown cigar-shaped object in the sky with no wings, no tail, no visible means of propulsion, virtually no noise, flying kind of erratically in the night sky, slowly, as if it was in trouble. It had a gash in the side and the back of it, and it had white vapor smoke, according to the witnesses, coming out the backside. And they all said immediately that it was clearly in trouble. It's the way it was flying with the gash in the side of it and this white vapor smoke. They said it wasn't smoke like smoke from a fire. It was like a white vapor. Then you have an ultralight pilot, amateur ultralight pilot, and a professor at a school in Sao Paulo of history by the name of Carlos de Souza. He was traveling very early on the morning of January 13th, 1996. He was going from Sao Paulo to the state of Minas Gerais to go ultralight flying with his friends. It's probably about 5 o'clock in the morning, and he sees this strange object in the sky above him while traveling on the freeway. And he was like, wow, that thing's in trouble. It looks like it's going down. And it did go down. And he got off the freeway to go to where this thing hit the ground. And he ended up at this farm called the Maialini Farm, probably about 6 to 10 miles as the crow flies outside of Varginha, Brazil. And he comes upon a vast football field size area of metallic bits of almost paper, like tinfoil type paper, with a very large section of the craft still intact. He gets out of the car. He said that this overwhelming odor of sulfur and ammonia was so powerful that he grabbed his t-shirt and he covered up his nose and his mouth, and his eyes were watering and burning. And he just It was the last thing he expected. He wasn't thinking this thing is otherworldly. Never once did it dawn on him that that's what possibly that it was. He said he picked up one of these pieces of like foil-like paper and he crumpled it up in his hands. And when he released it, it regained its form. Mm-hmm. Just as this was happening, military trucks from the base, the military base, Eza, arrived. They came in from the opposite direction that he arrived. And at gunpoint, they forced him out of there. About 6 or 7 days later, in the town of Varginha, there were reports pouring in from both civilian, military police, fire department of these strange creatures that were roughly 4 feet tall. They had brown, oily skin, big, big red eyes, 3 to 4 times the size of human eyes, feeble, weak, trembling, cowering. They looked in distress. They were suffering. They were frightened, according to the witnesses, and non-threatening. And in particular, there were 3 girls, 2 of which were sisters, named Valkyria, was 14, her sister Liliani, who was 16, and their friend Katya, who was 21. And they were traveling, they were taking a shortcut home through this field and had, a foot-tall grass and then a cinder block wall on one side. And there was this strange creature, being, ET, whatever you want to call it, cowering, leaning up against the cinder block wall, almost frozen. And they were looking at it like, what are we looking at? Is that a statue? And one of the girls just let out this screech, like, ah! Mm-hmm. And the creature that was sitting kind of like this, kneeling down with his hands between its legs, crouching down, turned and looked them right in the eyes. At which point, the 2 sisters grabbed each other and hightailed it out of there. Katya, the 21-year-old, was frozen in her tracks, locked eyes on this thing. And the older sister, the 16-year-old, Liliani, realizes that Katya is still left behind, making direct contact with this creature. And she leaves her sister, Valkyria, 14, and runs back up about 100 feet away and grabs Katya and pulls her out of there. The very title, Moment of Contact, is what I discovered in the field when I was interviewing these 3 girls, these 3 witnesses. I said to Katya, was there any level of communication during that moment of contact? And I thought that made a pretty good title for the film, because it all boils down to that moment of contact. And she said that it communicated that I'm scared, help me.
No doubt telepathic communication.
Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. Look, and I had a hard time. I actually heard about this case in the late 90s when I was starting Out of the Blue. And my co-producer, we were looking for cases to investigate. Tim Coleman was like, oh, we got to look into this case. It happened in Brazil about this UFO that reportedly crashed and these beings walking through the town. And I just thought, oh my God, come on, please spare me. And I wrote it off so quickly. I didn't look into it for about 11 or 12 years. And when I looked into it, I did it with a high level of reluctance. And to my complete amazement, here I am 12 years later after looking into it, and I made an entire movie on it with the help of co-producer Marco Leal in Brazil and a number of other Brazilian researchers. And here it is, Moment of Contact.
That's quite a story. I'm sure that the people involved were traumatized by the event, and I'm sure they still are today. And we'll talk about that when we get back. We're going to have to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a few minutes with James Fox. Are you thinking about purchasing a wood-fired heating or cooking appliance but don't know where to start? The new book, Wood-Fired Heating and Cooking, will guide you through the process and make the decision much easier. Find out about wood stoves, wood-burning fireplace inserts, masonry heaters, cook stoves, brick ovens, and more. Learn about operation and maintenance, buying and storing wood, even how to make your own charcoal. A bonus section includes delicious recipes for cooking in a wood-burning oven, grill, tandoori oven, or smoker. The wise homeowner, prepper, or homesteader will have the ability to heat their home with wood when the power goes out or to save money on increasing gas bills. Wood-fired heating and cooking is available at Amazon. Visit www.woodfiredpub.com for more information. That's woodfiredpub.com. And we're back with UNX News. I'm your host, Margie Kay, and we're speaking this evening with filmmaker James Fox. James, welcome back, and thank you again for spending time to talk with me this evening about your new film. And let's get into The Witnesses, because I recently watched the film, and wow, it's so impressive. And we were talking before the show a little bit about the photography, and I was thinking throughout the entire film that this photography is great. The drone footage is fantastic. It really gives you a sense of location with that drone footage. And then I find out at the end that you're the drone operator. So how long did it take you to learn to fly that drone?
Well, so I flew remote control airplanes for years. And flying a remote control airplane is not easy, because when it's flying away from you, left is left and right is right. When it's flying towards you, those controls are the opposite, and things are happening rather quickly. You can't hover an airplane, so it's always moving through the sky. So and funny enough, before drones came out, I built my own camera system and put it into an airplane. And I remember going to the model shop, and the guy's like, well, why would you want a small, camera in your airplane? I said, why wouldn't I want a small camera? I want to do aerial photography. He was like, okay. And I built the whole thing, and I had to have a transmitter and then a receiver and then a recording device on the ground. It was very complicated, and it was hard to get shots because you're constantly moving. So when the drones came out, that was a very easy transition for me, because, they can hover, and they have all sorts of protective software that has distance security measures where the drone can stop before it impacts. You can turn those off, but if you keep them on, they're fairly easy to fly. And yeah. I just like the aerial perspective. Like when you interview a witness at a particular event, it's nice to see the whole area from above looking down. And the first time I was told by all the Brazilian researchers that we had done this with this case, because what we didn't realize was the proximity between military blockades, encounter with the girls, alleged capture with the police officers, all within a few blocks of each other. And so it gave us a really nice perspective also at the crash site, the alleged crash site. One of the things that a lot of people don't notice, and maybe they will once I mention this, if you look at the aerial shots that we took of the impact site or the crash site, according to Carlos de Souza, the witness, the whole area of the crash debris field looks different than everything around it. It looks like it's been molested, bulldozed, exposed to some sort of acid. The coloring is different. Everything is different. And we noticed that from the air. We did not notice that from the ground.
Yeah.
So it really gave us a distinct advantage, and I think added a lot to the film.
Yes, because obviously something happened there.
It certainly looks that way.
Everybody that you interviewed in the film seemed very genuine. Do you believe that they were all telling the truth about this incident?
Well, so every single person I could probably talk about each witness individually until the sun comes up. What it took to get them eventually to go, either go on camera disguised or go on camera altogether. It was over a decade. In some cases, 26 years, from other researchers to us, finding these witnesses, approaching these witnesses, and then convincing them ultimately after, and like I said, in some cases up to a decade long, to come forward. And none of them did it willingly. None of them approached us. We found them. We did all our due diligence. We had photographic and a paper trail of their time, either as a military base, the Brazilian military, the police department, the doctors that we interviewed that were allegedly involved with this case, because there was a death with a 23-year-old military police officer by the name of Marco Chirizi. And according to his family, particularly his sister, Marta, who we interviewed on camera, he was involved in the second capture of one of these creatures that took place just a couple blocks away from where these three girls that I described earlier encountered this strange being. Probably about 2 to 2.5 hours later, they were on patrol, on the lookout for something unusual. They were not told there's an ET running around or that there's some strange creature. They were just told that there's something unusual, keep an eye out for it. They were driving down this road just a few blocks away, about 2.5 hours after the girls' encounter, which, by the way, was spreading like wildfire all across Brazil. The news media were getting involved. It was just like exploding across Brazil about these women because it took place in broad daylight. 3 witnesses that came within 8 to 10 feet of this creature. And so I think the vast majority of people believed these girls. And these 2 military men, Eric Lopes was the driver. The passenger, also military police, was Marco Chirizi. And they were driving down this road, and this creature reportedly ran across the road right in front of him. Eric slams his brakes on. The passenger, Marco Chirizi, jumps out, and he grabs this creature with his bare hands. Put up very little of a fight, puts it in the back of the car, and takes it to the local hospital, ultimately at Regional Hospital. And apparently he got like a scratch somewhere on his arm right about here. And that scratch got infected. And according to his family and fellow researchers in Brazil, Marco had this greasy, oily, smelly substance on his body, and he was getting rubbing alcohol, and he was trying to rub it on his body and clean whatever it was on him. It was on his clothes, it was on his skin, smelled like sulfur and ammonia. And after a couple of weeks, he began to fall ill. He admits himself to the emergency room, and he gets this infection. It goes into his bloodstream. The doctor said that they threw the kitchen sink at him, every possible antibiotic that normally would treat a common infection. Body didn't respond, immune system failed, and he died. So, yeah, and the driver, Eric Lopes, had gone MIA for 26 years. Even the family of the deceased officer, who's apparently in the passenger seat, was unable to get a statement from Eric Lopes. People had tried going to his house, tried calling him for 26 years, and he completely was just vanished. And we had the good fortune of interviewing the current town mayor, Mayor Varginha, and he was quite forthcoming in his belief that the incident did happen, as the witnesses claim it had happened, and that indeed a UFO did crash and there were live creatures that were recovered by the Brazilian military. He then he said all this on camera, which was amazing to me, that you had an elected official that was going to talk about this case openly and publicly. He said, hey, if there's anything I can do to help, my resources are yours. So I thought about it for a day, and I thought, yeah, I could definitely take you up on that. How about locating this apparent driver, Eric Lopes? So the mayor went to work. He found Eric Lopes, his where he resided, and we put together a team, and we went to Eric Lopes's house. We did a thing called doorstepping, and that's quite a scene in the movie.
Oh, it is indeed, and it's quite scary because I'm looking at the translation,
which I didn't know what was.
and
I
you
didn't
don't know.
know what was being
You
said.
obviously don't know what's going on,
No.
and don't know what he's saying, but he was very threatening.
Yeah, basically said 3 times that bullets are going to start flying if you don't get out of here immediately. And and initially he was saying, that he was a friend of Eric Lopes, that Eric Lopes is not going to talk about the ET thing, and that bullets were going to start flying. And then the translators in the field didn't tell me what was being said. I did, however, have a good look into this man's eyes, and he was perched out this window on the 2nd floor of his house, and he had like one hand on the sill and another hand down below the sill, and he kept looking, and he was doing this the whole time directly at the cameraman, Dave West. And Dave said he'd never felt like that level of threat before, like, don't do it, don't do it, like this the whole time. And I'm looking at this guy in the eyes, and I don't really know what's going on. I don't know for sure that it's Eric Lopes. I don't know what's being said, but I see this face that I'd never seen a face quite like it. It looked like the face of a man who had been harboring a deep, dark secret for a long time. And that had profoundly impacted his way of life, like his whole demeanor. He just looked like he had the weight of the world resting on his shoulders. And I could see it in his eyes. And I remember just being astonished by this facial expression, you could read it in his eyes. And it was very intense. And at the end of the day, when I looked over at one of the gentlemen who, at the behest of the mayor, this guy Homolo, who was a former politician and town lawyer, he looked over at me in no uncertain terms, and he did this, like this, and he said, "Terminado," like, we're leaving right now. Don't ask another question now. And I could see in his eyes he was dead serious. So we left, and then he confirmed for me on camera just moments later that he threatened to kill everybody, and that he believed that Eric Lopes was extremely serious. And I thought to myself, if this man wasn't the actual driver, why wouldn't he have just come out and said, you know what, guys, this is all fantasy. It's gotten completely, misperceived as something that it's not. And I've got nothing to hide here. There's nothing to talk about. This is a non-event, but he didn't do that. So
right.
We concluded at the end of the day that Eric Lopes was the driver during the second capture.
That's more evidence right there.
Yeah.
Without him even saying anything. I noticed that some of the people you interviewed mentioned that they had been visited by Men in Black, basically. Did you get the sense from any of them that they thought, well, obviously they were threatened by them and they were told not to talk about the case, not to talk about what they saw, but did you get the sense from any of the witnesses that they had any feeling that the MIBs were non-humans?
There was something peculiar about them. I had heard about these so-called MIBs for a long time, but I had a really hard time believing that these people could exist. It just seemed too far-fetched to me. And so I ignored it in the first 3, 4. Well, actually, I did a slight mention in The Phenomenon. You had a landing case that took place at a school at Westall in 1966. And the school teacher, who's recently come forward, he came forward in our film, but only disguised from the back, Mr. Greenwood. He said he had a visit from these very intimidating plainclothes guys in suits that threatened him and talked about destroying his career and all these things. And that was the first time I kind of reported on them, but I'd ignored them with all the previous accounts. And I'd heard very credible reports dating right back to Out of the Blue that took place in Arizona in 1997. But there was something about the mother of the 2 girls that described this encounter with these men in suits that I just found unavoidable to include in the film. I found her testimony to be ironclad. I just couldn't imagine why on earth the mother of these 2 children would make this story up. So I decided to take a bit of a chance and include her testimony of these men. And then, of course, I found out that Carlos de Souza, the gentleman who claimed to have seen the actual crash of this object, also had similar men in dark suits and unmarked cars with no license plates, also intimidating him. They didn't say, "We'll kill you." They said, "If you talk about what you saw, things are going to get very weird for you." Then they reminded him about his family, where he lived, and all these types of things.
Yeah, they knew everything about him.
Yeah.
And that's a threat right there when that happens. He also mentioned they were very tall.
Yeah.
And I have heard that in a number of my cases that I've investigated, that the MIBs are tall, sometimes very, very pale skin. A lot of times they wear sunglasses and hide their eyes. Did any of these witnesses mention that they wore sunglasses?
They didn't say sunglasses. They said dressed in all black.
Okay.
And she said that she ran. They were very intimidating. They tried to bribe her with money. They tried to get her daughters to lie and say what they saw was something different. The mother refused. She asked them many times to leave her house. They were very persistent. And then they ultimately left when she was threatening to call the police. And she said she was scared. And she ran out right behind them to see what kind of car they were driving, and they were gone.
Crazy stuff.
Very crazy stuff. And look, I know just the very fact that I'm reporting on that puts my credibility on the line, but don't take it from me. Listen to the eyewitness accounts and look into the eyes of these witnesses and determine for yourself whether you feel they're telling the truth. I wouldn't have included it if I didn't feel it was incredibly compelling.
I think anybody who watches the film would come to the same conclusion, because everybody that you interviewed seemed very credible and very serious about what they saw, what they witnessed. And there were multiple witnesses. It's very unusual for a UFO crash landing case to have multiple witnesses, and especially those that will come forward and speak about it. Now, the military man you called, believed you called him X, Military X?
Yes.
I got a sense, even though his voice was a bit distorted for the interview, obviously to maintain
anonymity.
He seemed like he was scared the entire time. Did you get a sense of that?
Oh, are you kidding? We knew about him from 1996. He actually gave a statement, not to be released, but a statement on camera to a gentleman named Paccaccini, who was one of the leading Brazilian UFO researchers. He's disappeared for 18 years. He's just come forward for the first time 2 weeks ago. He gave a statement along with other witnesses from the military base as a on camera, never to be released. But if anything happened to them, it was sort of a security thing, that those tapes that had been made copies and distributed all over Brazil and even outside of Brazil were going to be released. And so that was sort of a protection for them. So we knew about this particular witness and the other witness for some time, but he had vanished. Marco Leal, with the help of some other Brazilian researchers, found him about a year ago. At this point, it's about 2 years ago, and slowly built up a relationship with him with the idea that he was never going to come forward, that he would just share his story. I managed to persuade my fellow producer who's in Brazil to just get me a meeting with him. And it was like the scene out of a movie when we arrived way to the north in Brazil, just to meet with him, look him in the eyes and talk with him and see if there's any way, if there's anything we can do to get him to come forward anonymously and share his story. And ultimately we prevailed for the first time in 26 years. And it was released in Moment of Context. And he shared dozens of photographs of him in the military, as a military base. We knew he was a legitimate witness. He was terrified. He said he's been plagued by this story for 26 years. Marco had said, gosh, I always wish I could have that level of confirmation. And, he responded simply by saying, this has been nothing but a nightmare for me. It's ruined pretty much my life. I live my life in fear. I get phone calls every year or two from the military base, checking in on me, talking about my family, talking about my location. Have I moved? These types of things, just intimidating.
Yeah.
And in fact, at the end of the interview, he thanked us for the opportunity to share his story one final time for the public, and told us never to stop pushing and investigating this case.
Yes, that is exactly what he said at the end of the interview. How many witnesses to this event were there?
Well, there's no one witness that we spoke with or met with that had the entire pieces of like the whole picture. We had doctors that worked on the deceased military officer, Marco Chiriz, that came forward for the first time. We had reportedly at regional hospital, which we know that's where Eric Lopes and Marco Chiriz initially went to with this strange creature, talk about taking x-rays. He was found 8 years ago. He was never going to come forward. Ultimately, he ended up coming forward 4 years after he retired from the hospital. He shared his account. We had the sister of the deceased officer, his family, come forward and talk with us. But then there's like people in the town that saw the military blockade, the local media that tried to get access to witnesses and inquire at the military base EZA, that were threatened with prison time if they ask any more questions. Everyone has a little piece of the puzzle. When you put those testimonies together, it paints this picture of a UFO crash and live beings captured.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, to our complete astonishment, it led us to the inescapable fact that the United States Air Force was involved. We had countless witnesses that were saying that there were men from the United States that were there in dark suits, asking questions. We had flight control officers, the radar guys that allow planes coming in from outside Brazil to land, say that there was a secret United States Air Force plane that flew into Campinas, SpaceX military base on the 22nd of January, 1996, the very, 2 days after, or actually a day or so after the ground support transported the being from Varginha to EZA military base to SpaceX Campinas. And then you got a secret mission flying into the United States Air Force, landing in Campinas without the authorization of the Brazilian government. This all done in secrecy. And all the military men that we spoke to, both on and off camera, all said unequivocally that the U.S. Air Force was involved.
That's not a big surprise. They've done that in Mexico and other countries as well. It seems like the U.S. has total jurisdiction over UFO crashes. Is there any film footage of the creature that was not shown in your film?
So if you listen to Military X's testimony, he said there was an officer from the military base with a camera over his shoulder. He wasn't shooting at the time, but he definitely identified that source. There are other sources that apparently were at Regional Hospital, Humanitas Hospital, that took photographic evidence. We've managed to potentially locate some of these footages or photographic evidence. But I remind your audience, just because you're able to dig something up or possibly dig something up and find it and locate the people that may have shot it, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get your hands on it. Remember, we approached all the witnesses through our ground operation for, well over a decade. And it's very frustrating when you get that close. And there are other aspects of the photographic evidence that at this point, I'm just not willing to share publicly because it could jeopardize our efforts. But suffice to say that there's nothing that we aren't doing to get our hands on that footage, I can assure you.
I'll bet.
If anybody thinks that there's someone out there that wants it more than me, they can.
I noticed that the people you spoke with also said things like, they could be rich from this. They could have made a lot of money going public with this, and none of them did.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that does lend more credibility to their story, because they're not out to make money. They didn't make something up, and it really destroyed their lives. It didn't help their lives at all by coming forward and speaking to anybody about this.
Carlos de Souza made one quick video statement on camera in 1996 to a Brazilian UFO researcher and engineer by the name of Claudio Covo. And after that, he vanished for 26 years. Marco and his fellow Brazilian researchers found him, slowly over a year period, developed a relationship, and ultimately convinced him to come forward after hiding for 26 years. He's never gotten a dime from this story. He's got nothing but ridicule and threats. His own family questioning, what he really saw and why he would tell this story. He was extremely emotional when we got back, when we ultimately found the alleged impact site. It's all in the film, but we documented that as it unfolded. Not a single shot in the entire film was staged.
Well, I highly recommend the film. I watched it once. I'm going to watch it again, because when you go back and watch something again, you're going to see things that you missed the first time. And I appreciate the amount of work and effort that it went into this film. Where can people get it?
So if you want to buy it from iTunes or Vimeo, because it comes with 2 hours of bonus material at the same price. If you want to just rent it, get it from Amazon. It's the cheapest. And if you could, pretty please, with sugar on top, rate it on iTunes. It's tremendously helpful for us, because it changes the algorithms, and it allows more people to have more. The film exposes itself more through the algorithm. So if you could take a moment and rate it on iTunes, that would be tremendously helpful to us. But again, if you're going to rent it, get it from Amazon. It's the cheapest.
Okay, well, everybody go to iTunes right now and get the movie with the 2 hours of bonus footage. I hate to ask you this, but since it took you 12 years for The Phenomenon and 8 years for Moment of Contact, are you planning on doing anything else in the future?
So it was 12 years for Moment of Contact.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And 8 years for The Phenomenon. No, it's okay.
Okay, whatever it was.
I'm starting production next week.
Oh my goodness.
I really feel like after my meeting with former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid and the whole ATIP program and all the talk of this astonishing, never before seen evidence that's tucked away somewhere in some vault somewhere. It's been confirmed by so many different people, high-level government officials, and then now learning about that this alleged crash debris and bodies went to the United States. I want to know where this stuff is and who has the authority to release it, and that's going to be my primary objective for my next project, and I'll be starting next week.
Well, all I can say is good luck with that.
I know. Well, gotta try.
That's a hard nut to crack.
You gotta try.
Especially when they release information that's completely redacted every page.
Here's the thing. If I meet with members of the task force, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but they can't really pull the wool over my eyes. I've been to China. I've been to Russia. I've been to Australia. I've been to Africa. I've been to South America. I've been all over Europe. I've met with high-level military and government officials. My films speak for themselves. You can't tell me this is a Chinese drone. You can't tell me it's misidentification of something conventional. We've got close encounters of the third kind, which is so different than an unidentified object in the sky, beings on the ground.
Right.
Explain that to me.
Exactly. James, thank you so much. I appreciate it. This hour has gone by so quickly. I hope we will be doing something together, hopefully in the near future. So we'll definitely be in touch.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much. Well, folks, I can't believe that the hour is over. As a reminder, please subscribe to the UNX Network YouTube channel so you don't miss a show, and get a free subscription at unxnetwork.com to get our blog articles, event notices, and a digital copy of the quarterly UNX magazine. And, of course, Lee Spiegel is our managing editor. This is Margie Kay. I'll see you again next week.
You've been listening to the UNX News Podcast with Margie Kay. Any rebroadcast or duplication of this program or its content without express written permission from UNX Media or Margie Kay herself is strictly prohibited. The UNX News Podcast, in direct cooperation with the internet website unxmedia.com.